a group is also meeting to look for their own independence. They lose you guys in Saskatchewan, it's over for Canada.
We'll bring Saskatchewan along with us. For far too long, we've been held hostage by the Ottawa elites. And it's time for that relationship to end. It's abusive, it's toxic, we want out.
We have all the minerals and oil and forestry and fresh water that we can't use, we can't access because the federal government says you can't do that.
Did they mention Alberta's oil? Nothing. It's lumber, there's steel down, what about us? It's our money.
Western provinces went all out on 51 to 57 statehood. Carney throws Tantrum Fit. Western provinces just went all out on 51st to 57th statehood, and Ottawa is in full meltdown mode. This is a full-blown rebellion against a system people believe is broken beyond repair. And while Carney throws a public tantrum, the West is quietly preparing to rip the country's map in half.
You would rather be American than Canadian?
Yes, but I'd rather be Albertan, independent.
Ottawa has started to panic after internal numbers from the referendum petition held in Alberta last week came back. It's the kind that shows what happens when the regions that actually fund the system stop cooperating. That's when this stopped being noise and became a threat.
As if Canada is about to change forever. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even parts of British Columbia just dropped an earth-shattering Wexit announcement. This isn't a drill. We're talking binding referendums. We're talking new regional governments. We're talking the most serious challenge to Canadian unity in a generation.
This isn't Western alienation anymore. It's coordination. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, British Columbia, Quebec, Yukon, and Nunavut. Different politics, but AM direction. Provinces aren't yelling. They're building laws, referendum frameworks, trade pathways, and resource control systems. That's a strategic exit plan to control their resources and work for their own people. Here's something you must have to differentiate. Symbolic protest is loud. Operational separation is quiet. Ottawa can ignore rallies, but they can't ignore provinces preparing to function without them.
For decades, what's commonly called Wexit, right, which involves the whole Western Canadian provinces seceding, Wexit was dismissed and laughed at as nothing more than a fringe peripheral issue. No more.
The trigger for a lot of this was pipelines. Alberta, being blocked from real Pacific access, wasn't just an infrastructure issue. It was a power issue. Produce billions, but don't control how it reaches the world. That changes everything.
Alberta is considered like the Texas of Canada. They are way more conservative, way more limited government, and produce the overwhelming amount of the country's commodities like timber and oil and a bunch of other stuff. So the federal government of Canada is just like basically pooping their pants because they realize that they can't fund any of their big government programs without the revenue from the resources of that area.
When you force Western exports south instead of west, you change gravity. Trade flows south, capital flows south, relationships flow south. Over time, political alignment follows the money. That's not ideology, that's logistics.
If I have a vote, resounding yes.
No way I want to become part of the States. We've got too much to live for here in Canada.
History is clear on this. When resource regions are choked off, sovereignty movements grow. Alberta didn't wake up one day and decide to leave. They were pushed there by repeated denials, delays, and rules that don't apply evenly across the country. Pipeline rejection became, in many people's minds, proof that Ottawa values control over prosperity. Once that belief spreads, trust doesn't weaken, it collapses. Now this becomes real because of one legal mechanism Ottawa can't talk away, the Clarity Act. A 50% plus one referendum doesn't mean instant independence, but it does force negotiations. That's written law. Quebec already proved the path exists.
It hasn't been going very well in Canada for the past however long, and we have young children. And we hope to give them a better future if we can make some changes in this province. And if that means separating, then so be it.
That's why this isn't emotional anymore. Provinces stopped arguing theory and started the preparation process. Referendum laws, legal structures, administrative frameworks. Ottawa fears the process more than the protest because once a vote is held, they can't refuse. They get pulled into negotiations whether they like it or not.
At this point, I think it's likely that they get the number of signatures that they need.
Alberta sits at the center of this for a reason. Over $340 billion in GDP, massive energy reserves. Third largest proven oil reserves on Earth. And for decades, Albertans have watched their wealth flow east while their own projects get blocked.
For the first time in years, without having to run through Ottawa's red tape, which we're sick of.
The Alberta Prosperity Project didn't grow because of social media hype. It grew because people ran the numbers. Under Canadian rules, large chunks of Alberta's production get redistributed. Under American rules, that money stays local.
So Alberta and Saskatchewan, their oil and gas titans, but pipeline cancellations, tightening of regulations, tax grabs from Ottawa, they've hammered their economies. So we're seeing billions in energy revenues flow eastward, while Westerners see their jobs, their industries, and their ambitions blocked by liberal cities like Montreal, thousands of miles away.
That's where statehood becomes more attractive than pure independence. Independence creates uncertainty, currency, defense, trade deals, market access. Statehood removes that instantly. US dollar, US military, automatic access to the largest consumer market on the planet. For investors, that's stability. For producers, that's leverage. That's why this isn't just about identity. It's about control of revenue and risk.
Development here, for the first time, there is now a public timetable.
Then there's property rights. Canada does not have constitutional property rights. The United States does. That matters in resource provinces. Property tax in Canada feels like permanent rent. You can be taxed out of the land you supposedly own. For farmers, ranchers, and landowners, that hits hard. American protections aren't perfect, but they're stronger. For people who think in generations, that changes how safe wealth feels. Statehood starts to look like asset protection, not rebellion.
You're not the only ones. All of a sudden you make all this noise and you're like, and all these other people are like, hey, we produce stuff too and we pay a ton of taxes that don't go back to our thing.
Saskatchewan is watching all of this closely. Public tone stays careful. Behind the scenes, legal alignment with Alberta is happening. Referendum frameworks are being matched. Provincial analysis shows more than $100 billion in projected losses under current federal policies by 2035.
A group is also meeting to look for their own independence. They lose you guys in Saskatchewan, it's over.
Saskatchewan produces massive amounts of potash and uranium. Those resources are regulated by people who don't live with the consequences of delays and restrictions. When Saskatchewan looks at how U.S. states control their own resources and keep revenue local, the contrast is obvious. That's why Saskatchewan is waiting. Not because they're unsure, because Alberta has to move first.
We'll bring Saskatchewan along with us. They're just like Albertans, and we have so much in common. They're like our little brother to the east, and we'll take them along with us.
What Ottawa still doesn't seem to grasp is that this isn't driven by emotion. It's driven by incentives. When a system punishes production and rewards central control, producers look for exits, not because they're angry, because they're rational.
For far too long, we've been taken advantage of. We've paid the bills, and we've been treated like second-class citizens. Taxation without representation. Two votes in Alberta have the same weight as one vote in Nova Scotia. It's time for that to end. We have unfair representation. We pay the bills. And we're tired of our rights being trampled on, whether that be from COVID to Second Amendment, which we don't have yet, but we're going to fight for that.
Add British Columbia's legal challenges to equalization. Add Manitoba's geographic risk if Alberta and Saskatchewan leave. Add Quebec's renewed sovereignty push. Add Yukon and Nunavut's strategic mineral and Arctic value. Suddenly, this no longer looks like isolated discontent. It looks like structural realignment. That's why Carney's government isn't calm. They're not dealing with a protest cycle. They're dealing with the possibility that the country's economic engine is preparing to shift its loyalty. Money, trade, and infrastructure already run south. Legal frameworks are being prepared. Once systems are in place, fear loses its power. Separation becomes administration, not chaos. That's the part Ottawa is struggling to accept.
I think the people of Alberta would agree with that sentiment, that they would prefer not to be a part of Canada and be a part of the United States, because we are winning day in and day out.
One of the sneakiest reasons this entire movement is gaining real traction has nothing to do with oil or pipelines at first glance. It comes down to property and how secure people actually feel about what they own. Canada does not have constitutional property rights, while the United States does. This is one of the reasons Saskatchewan's behavior looks calm on the surface, but serious underneath. Publicly, Saskatchewan leaders talk about unity and staying within Confederation. Privately, they are preparing legal pathways that match Alberta's. Saskatchewan is watching Alberta very closely because Alberta is the province with the size and leverage to test the system first.
For the first time, there is now a public timetable.
Their own provincial projections say federal policies could cost Saskatchewan more than $111 billion by 2035. That is not an abstract number. That is pressure on farms, mines, rural towns, and export industries. Saskatchewan produces enormous amounts of potash and uranium, which are critical to global agriculture and energy systems. Yet, decisions about those industries increasingly come from people far removed from the regions that live with the consequences. When Saskatchewan compares that to US states that control their own resources and keep more of the revenue locally, the contrast becomes difficult to ignore. That is why Saskatchewan is not rushing loudly into the spotlight. They are waiting for Alberta to move first, so they can follow with far less risk.
Western votes and voices just keep getting drowned out. In fact, they often use the term Western alienation, and it's not just a slogan, it's a lived reality, reawakened by fresh federal policies that sideline the resource-rich provinces in the West.
Manitoba faces a different kind of pressure that has nothing to do with ideology and everything to do with geography. If Alberta and Saskatchewan were to become US states, Manitoba would become physically separated from the rest of Canada. Here's the thing. Manitoba already does major business with the United States through agriculture, electricity, and transportation. The Port of Churchill and Manitoba's hydropower resources are naturally tied into the American Midwest. Geography is not waiting for political debates to finish. It is already pushing Manitoba toward a decision. Over time, maps tend to matter more than speeches, and Manitoba's map is quietly narrowing its options.
I've worked 44 years in the oil patch, and the East has always taken from here and abused us. And I'm sick and tired of it.
British Columbia adds another layer of pressure through the courts and through culture. British Columbia generates more than $31.6 billion a year from natural resources, yet much of that wealth flows east while BC faces increasingly strict environmental restrictions at home. That is where the double standard narrative takes hold. BC taxpayers see money leaving the province while being told to accept tighter rules and higher costs. At the same time, Eastern provinces are not held to the same level of restriction. On top of that, British Columbia's economic and cultural gravity already runs north to south. Vancouver, Victoria, Seattle, and Portland are tightly connected through trade, technology, shipping, and culture. For many people in BC, those American cities feel closer in daily life than Ottawa or Toronto. When trade routes, business relationships, and cultural reference points already point south, the political border starts to feel more like administrative paperwork than a natural dividing line.
It's almost as if they don't really care about the West that much. But that's nothing new.
It's almost New Quebec changes the entire dynamic by putting pressure on the other side of the country. Support for sovereignty has risen, particularly among younger voters, with polling showing support levels around 45% in some groups. The Parti Québécois has discussed referendum timelines, which creates a second major front of constitutional pressure. If Quebec moves, it does not just add another province to the story. It legitimizes the entire conversation across the country.
The appeal court ruled Yukon failed to recognize Nachonayak's right to help manage land in its traditional territory.
In the far north, Yukon and Nunavut add a strategic dimension that Ottawa can no longer ignore. These territories control vast areas rich in rare earth minerals, gold, and other critical resources. Arctic shipping routes and military positioning are becoming more important every year. Northern access is no longer a theoretical advantage. It is becoming a core part of North American security and trade planning. Alaska-style resource development frameworks are increasingly attractive to northern leaders who want to reduce federal bottlenecks and retain greater control over development and revenue. When Indigenous governance and land control are added to that mix, the political structure begins to look very different from the traditional federal model Ottawa is used to managing.
In this time of great consequence, we are choosing. We are choosing to work together to build one Canadian economy. We've made great progress over the past year. Now we have to redouble our efforts with the provinces and territories.
The real reason Carney is panicking is mathematical. If Alberta and British Columbia peel away, Ottawa doesn't just lose political control, it loses over a quarter of the country's GDP almost overnight. Add Saskatchewan's agriculture and critical minerals, and now you're talking about food security, fertilizer, uranium, and export revenue vanishing from federal balance sheets. Layer in Quebec's manufacturing risk and the strategic value of the Northern Territories, and what's left of Canada starts to look fiscally fragile.
Trump's talk of a 51st state has normalized a new challenge to Confederation. And then domestically, those who've been keeping an eye on this stuff for decades have been warning that the idea of Alberta separating is not feeling as fringy as it used to.
What makes this even more dangerous for the federal government is that separation is already happening quietly. Trade flows, financial systems, infrastructure planning, and regulatory alignment are already drifting south. Provinces are building their own systems, reducing reliance on Ottawa. And here's where it snowballs. One yes vote triggers another. Alberta pulls Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan isolates Manitoba. BC breaks legally and economically. Quebec forces a constitutional crisis. The territories form a northern strategic bloc. Suddenly, this isn't a protest, it's restructuring. The final question isn't if Canada changes. It's whether the map has already started changing without anyone admitting it yet.